It starts with his father being a young man in Poland, and he gets married. He marries Art's mother. Uh, they are in Poland. They have a child. Vladek Spiegelman goes off to war. He joins the Polish army. He is drafted basically into the Polish army. And as he's drafted into the Polish army, the Nazis are moving in through Eastern Europe. So he's on the front lines. He sees battle. He gets captured in battle, but he escapes. And in the process of escaping, um, he ends up reuniting with his family. But their son, at the time, they had sent to live with his sister in a different part of Poland. And what happened there was, by the time that the sister came back, uh, in like where the Nazis were, where the sister lived, coincided at the same time. And instead of being captured and sent to a concentration camp, the sister committed suicide and also killed their son at the time. So it's a very sad story, but he uses the mice, as you can see in the picture here, and it doesn't make the story any better, but he goes between past and present. And at the time, he's interviewing his father. It's 1978, and so he's telling his father's story, but he's also presently telling his story. And so it's a blend of both, and you get to see father and son. And just the aftermath of this interview and what happens and what everything that is revealed to the son. And I'm not going to spoil the ending just in case you want to go read it, but it's a very, very good story. And again, taking a complex issue such as war, such as at the time you had World War II, the time of nationalism, you have being prisoners of war, the Holocaust in general. And so he's able to give you this story, and it's actually when it was originally done, it was part 1 and part 2. So if you read it, you want to read the complete version because there is a part 2 to the part 1 that he published in 1986.
Okay. We're going to get it. American Born Chinese by Loon Yang. All right. This book here is basically a memoir about his growing up as an American born Chinese. But what it does is it weaves two other tales into his story to make one story that can at once it seems real, but then it seems like it's fantasy at the same time. But it's all based on his um his time coming up in America. And basically, the premise of the story is that when he moves into his new neighborhood, he finds out that he's the only Chinese American student at his school. And he's always being picked on and doesn't really have any friends. And one of so the that's his story, but the stories that he weaves in, the first one would be that of the mythical Monkey King, which is one of the oldest Chinese fables out there. And what it is that the Monkey King is basically adored by all. He's a master of kung fu, and he is basically the most powerful monkey on earth. But he has a character flaw that never lets him realize his true potential. And the fact is, what it is, the Monkey King does not want to be a monkey. He wants to be revered as a god. And so that's the first story that he weaves in with his real life experience. The second story that he weaves in there is the story of Chin Ki. And basically, Chen Qi is a representation of the worst of Chinese stereotypes, cultural stereotypes. And basically, what he does, he brings him in as a character that constantly visits his cousin. And because his cousin is the popular kid at school, when Chen Qi comes around, he ends up basically ruining his cousin's life, or so to say. So every year, he basically has to change schools in order to get away from the shame of having Chen Qi as a cousin. And basically, they bring them. He Gene Lun Yang brings the stories together to make a pretty much, I guess you would say, comedic and action-packed story. And it's basically, this is one of the graphic novels, not one of the newer ones. This has been out around 2000, came out around 2006 to critical acclaim. And it is also basically the first graphic novel to win the ALA Prince Award. Okay.
All right. And this one right here, March, this is actually one of the newer ones that was on the list of just top 10 nonfiction graphic novels. But this one is chronicling the civil rights movement through the eyes of the late John Lewis, Congressman John Lewis, who passed away last year. He's thinking about his life, especially his time in the late 1950s and 1960s, and him being on the forefront of the civil rights movement at that time. And then it's juxtaposing with the time, it's 2008, and he is sitting in his office right before the inauguration of the first African-American president of the United States. And so you're juxtaposed. There's 3 books to this series. Where the picture right here is of book 1, just telling the story of John Lewis's life. And it was written by John Lewis and Andrew Aiden and illustrated by Nate Powell. I love the illustrations in this. Get a chance to just take a look at it. But you have it chronicles his life from his beginnings in Alabama, of being a child with many siblings, but a child of a farmer. But he was a child that he didn't want to just be a farmer. He didn't want to follow in his family's footsteps. He wanted to pursue education, and in the process of pursuing education, he pursued civil rights. He started when he would run away from his family farm, like, he was supposed to be working, and they'd be like, well, you can't go to school today because we need you to work on the farm. And next thing they know, they look up and John would be gone because he was gone to school. And so, but in his teen years, he attended school in Tennessee. And what he started doing when he was in Tennessee was doing some of the sit-ins at the lunch counters. And as sit-ins where Blacks were not allowed to eat. They could shop in department stores. They weren't they could spend their money in these department stores, but they could not go and eat a meal in the department stores' lunch counters. And so they started doing luncheons near his college. And this was an organized effort across most of the South, most of the segregated South. And he was in Nashville, and that's when he did his first sit-in. And he just, in describing, and you see through the pictures of what it was like to sit at that lunch counter. And some days would be great, not great, but they would be refused service, but there would be no violence. And then some days there would be violence where mobs of white people would show up and assault the students. And so March books 1, 2, and 3. There are 3 books in the series. Chronicles Congressman Lewis's life and achievements, all the way from the civil rights movement to becoming a U.S. congressman in the 80s, moving to Atlanta because he is from Alabama, but moving to Atlanta and representing district for the House of Representatives in Washington. So it's won awards. It was published in, gosh, I didn't write down when it was published, but it was published, I believe it was published in 2017, 2016, 2017. But I'll have to take a look. I have to look that up. But yeah, that's March. And I pass it back to you, Roland.
All right. Our next book that we're going to look at is Pyongyang, A Journey in North Korea by Guy Delisle. Guy Delisle is basically a French author or Canadian author. He was born in Quebec City in '66 and basically has been doing a lot of animation work. And what ended up happening in 2001, he was able to get a work visa to do some work through a French film animation company. And the place that he was able to get that work was in North Korea. So basically, what he did, he basically wrote a memoir or, kept notes on his stay. And so while living in the nation's capital for 2 months, he was able to observe a little bit of the culture and a few of the North Koreans that were allowed to be around him. And basically, that's how he formed the stories in this graphic novel, which is basically just his day to day for that 2 months, his day to day in Pyongyang. And that's basically it about this novel.
Yeah, I was, excuse me, I was reading about this one, and it was saying how he shied away from giving specific stories because he knew that if it ever got back to, excuse me, the North Koreans, that
Right.
these people would be assassinated or murdered, punished, and not because of, they did, not in the sense that they did something wrong, but because of the attention that it brought to North Korea, basically.
Right. They also say that he that's why he did that. But he basically he saw more. But
Mhm.
in the article, it was stating that how I guess they try to censor. They try
Yeah,
to censor everyone that's coming in, and so yeah, he observed more than what he put in the book.
yeah.
But he put in the book everything that they allowed him,
Hmm.
allowed him to view, just for that reason.
Very interesting, though. Yeah.
All right.
All right. All right. So this one, the Complete Persepolis. Persepolis is a Greek term for, it was an ancient city in Iran. Well, at the time, it was not Iran. It was considered Persia in the 6th century. But it was once the capital of the Persian Empire. But that is not what this is about. It's not a classic novel. It's more of a coming of age story of Marjan Satrapi is how you pronounce her name. Satrapi is come. She's describing the turbulent time as an autobiography of her life. She grew up in Iran when she grew up in Tehran during the Islamic Revolution of that time. Uh, if you know your history, you know that in uh, Iran at one point in time had a Shah who was like a king. That Shah was backed by the United States government for many, many years because what's one of the natural resources that comes out of Iran is oil. The Shah was deposed by the people in the late 70s, actually 1979. He was deposed, and an Islamic revolution happened where it basically the country came under control of, uh, and she describes them as religious fanatics, um, and it's still under that control. So, but it opens up and it shows you. It's a story that shows you kind of what life was like. She was 10 years old at the time. Uh, that all the changes in her life happened pretty much overnight, but it shows you that public and that private side, what it was like to walk in the streets, especially as a woman. Where at one point in time, I don't think people realize this today, but it was no different than any other country at the time. Women had certain rights. Women went to university. They held jobs as they were teachers and doctors and things like that at the time. And then overnight, they basically went into a repressed society where they had to have head coverings and could no longer work outside the home, could no longer walk by themselves outside the home without fear of persecution. So she opens up with this story of being a 10-year-old at the time and trying to process all these changes. And then it kind of, the story weaves through her youth of well, basically leaving Iran and growing up in a French high school that was located in Austria, and just kind of coming to terms with the Shah being deposed, the religious control of the country now, what it meant to be from Iran at that time, and some of the things that happened to her while she was at the French high school because of she was Iranian, and what it was like to navigate that as a child. And I think it showed. I've actually this is actually one I've read, and it also is a film. I think you could watch it on Netflix at one point in time, but yes, it was made into a animated film that really just shows um, what that she wanted you to see that Iran was more than what the media showed you. Like it was more than what the news said. It was more than what the talking heads said. That this was a place where people and families lived, and overnight their lives changed, and they are still, in a sense, adjusting to the fanatical regime that is there. And it was published in 2000. She wrote it between 2000 and 2003. The first book was published in 2000. It was published in French, but it was quickly translated to English, but not only English, it was translated to Arabic, Hebrew, many other languages, German, and yeah, and she, when it was also published, it was like, again, she's still Iranian and she's still proud of her country, and but yet she still points out what's wrong with her country too. So I definitely recommend it. It's a great read. It's won many awards also, and she is, it's just it's a good book. It's a good story. I definitely recommend this one.
All right. And next up, we have Palestine by Joe Sacco. Now, this is the one that I found most interesting. Um, Basically, Sacco wrote these books after a short stay in the Palestinian territories, a little bit after the Gulf War. Now, the original book was nine issues long, and in 2000, I believe 2006 or 2007, they released the complete story. Now, what this book takes place over like a 2 month period, 2 or 3 month period in late '91, early '92. And basically, what Sacco attempts to do is to bring you into the realm of his time that he stayed in the Palestinian territories, trying to get a feel for what they were going through during that time, because as everyone knows, it was a time of upheaval. And as in now, they were still in a head to head struggle with the Israelis for land um, in the Gaza Strip, basically. So basically, what he did, the 2 months that he spent in Palestine, he basically spent this time meeting with the Palestinians and just trying to get narratives from individuals on what their daily life was, life in a war zone, life in areas where some of their people had been pushed out by the Israelis and whatnot. And basically, when Sacco goes into this situation, he doesn't try to go as well. He knows he's going as a Westerner, which for one can be problematic, especially at that time. And so what he did, instead of going trying to say, "Hey, I'm here to change," or just to be a fly on the wall, he basically let them know that he wanted to immerse himself into their culture to basically find out, what it was that they went through day by day and how they affected by the reality that they have occupied territories that their people cannot expand into, that they historically they would have been able to, but now they're confined. It's in the story. It kind of there's a pivotal moment where he basically, I think he starts getting to the point where the items, the possessions that he has over there, instead of him being on a trip and surviving and just trying to get stories, basically, because he immersed himself in their culture, he can't help but to become um, a member of their community, if not for that short time. So he ends up giving up some of his possessions, shares, he's sharing his food, his the place where his lodgings, everything with the people around him. Uh, Near the end of the story, and an Israeli basically confronts him and says, "Hey, you're showing this story from one side. Why are you not showing it from another side?" And his being a Westerner, his reply is, "The Israeli side is the only side I have known."
Hmm.
Now he doesn't dismiss that, but he basically states that he would have to come back to experience it from the Israeli side, because this time everything was from the Palestinian side. Now, this actually was Sacco's first, I guess you can say, geopolitical work, and they basically released a an expanded edition later after the initial combining of the 9 stories. There's an expanded edition that released in 2007 that has a little bit more of the story than what was actually in the 9 books. So that one there is basically a an award winner. It has garnered one of the top 100 English language comics of the century. Next on our list will be Pride of Baghdad by K Vaughn.
Yeah. This is another one that I've actually read. It's an older one. It came out in 2007. It won a lot of awards. But Pride of Baghdad, written by K Vaughn, and you've probably heard of K Vaughn because he's written a lot of titles for DC, especially Vertigo. A lot of the he's written, I think, some Batman stuff and some other stuff. But he wrote this story, and it's based on the true story of a pride of lions that had during the second invasion of Iraq in the early 2000s after 9/11. There was a bombing raid that hit Baghdad, and in the process, it hit the Baghdad Zoo. And the lions were able, this pride of lions that were held in captivity, were escaped and were roaming the streets of Baghdad during this time. I mean, like it's an intense bombing raid, and the book is from the point of view of the animals. So a lot of the dialogue is how the animals are communicating with one another. Them going through the streets of Baghdad looking for food, looking for water, trying to figure their way out of this situation that they're in. And what it's doing is it's what when he's weaving this story, you also thinking of, first of all, war. The Americans were there to liberate the citizens of Baghdad, but also in the process, these lions are liberated. Excuse me. So liberation, what it means to be free, what it means to be to what you would sacrifice to be free, what you would go through to be free, and so it's juxtaposing these ideals of, you have war and the bloody battle of war, and then you have liberation, which is a freedom, and it's coming from the point of view of tigers. I'm sorry, I was right the first time. Lions who have been held in captivity all of their life in a zoo. They had never lived free, and so the true story of it was that I think in the end these these lions did not survive their trek through Baghdad, and the question was, animal rights activists at the time that it happened and they found out about it were outraged at the fact that the casualties of war. But you have to also think about, these are animals, but then you have the human casualties of war. Of Baghdad was bombed. Many people died in those bombs, and animal rights activists are screaming about a pride of lions dying, but then you're saying, but we're here occupying the space and we're at war. It just it gets you questioning a lot of things, and a lot of things of how we view human life, how we view life in general, not just human, but the life of these lions, that they deserve to lose their life just because they happen to be free in a war zone. I mean, if you see a pride of lions coming at you, I'm not gonna stop and ask any questions or try to round them up, especially in a war zone. But and that is exactly what happened. Um, so and it just and then that question of freedom itself, because should they have been freed in the first place anyway? Because it was an invasion. It was a time of knowing that maybe these animals should have been evacuated instead of being left to pretty much die, possibly in a bombing. So it won quite a few awards at its time, but the art in this book is absolutely breathtaking. Just and then it's written very well. Vaughn did a great job with the writing, because you're literally putting yourself in a lion's shoe. What would a lion think about being captured, or being trapped in a city, or trying to find its way out of an unknown area. And so it's from the point of view of the lions and the tolls of war, of human rights and animal rights, and I definitely recommend it. The Pride of Baghdad, and it is, like I said, all of these things that we're talking about today are based on true stories. So that kind of that human aspect to it also. These things did happen. So, yeah.
Okay, the next book on our list is The Silence of Our Friends by Mark Long and Jim Demonicus. This book right here was basically set in the civil rights, during the civil rights movement in Texas. And a little bit of background on the era was this was the time when the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, or better yet known as SNCC, had been banned from Texas Southern University's campus, which is a historically African American school, or HBCU. Stokely Carmichael, the chairman at the time, was portrayed in the media as an outside agitator who brought violence to any school that the SNCC came to. So that was their big reason that they were banned from the school. Now, in reaction to that ban, the TSU students boycotted classes and staged a sit-down protest. And what they did, they protested on a street called Wheeler Avenue that basically it was known for racist whites that would cruise through town, and would often hurl obscenities and everything from their vehicles. Now, what ended up happening is the police responded and basically arrested almost five, but five of the students. And they were known as the TSU 5 because they were charged with one of the officers' murders, because during the riot, an undercover officer was shot. So these five were charged with the murder. Now, forward to The Silence of Our Friends. Basically, this book, it's about two families from Texas, basically a white family that's from the racist neighborhood in the suburbs, and a black family from one of Houston's poorest wards. And basically, it's the story of them coming together in a certain way to actually help, to try to help those five black college students that were unjustly charged. And the story is told from the point of view of Mark Long, the author, whose father is a reporter covering the story. Now, once we get into the story of how the two families meshed and went about their situation, that's where the story becomes semi-fictional. The author basically rooted his story in events that he grew up around and around families that he grew up around as well. And so basically, they not only deal with the race issue, but they deal with family issues in the story. They also deal with the violence and the degradation and humiliation that blacks went through during the civil rights era. Now, this have to watch out in recommending this book, because sometimes it contains strong language and racial slurs, but they basically are accurate to the time that it was written, if you think about it being a tale set in 1967. Other than that, I think it's a very powerful story. I had just started in on it, and I found a digital copy where I think I got through probably like the first quarter of it. And I would suggest that if you are totally into the going ons of the civil rights movement and what was happening in different areas, because as we know, during the civil rights movement, what happened in Alabama may not be how the civil rights played out in Texas or in New York or whatnot. And this being a story from Texas, it's a little different. It's a little harsh, but It's a little different, but it kind of sets the stage to let you know where this author is coming from. Okay, our next story, our next graphic novel on the list will be 300 by Frank Miller.
This one right here, I'm sure a lot of you are already familiar with. You have the movie that was done, but originally Frank Miller published 300 in 1999. It was published under Dark Horse Comics. And as you can see the book there, when it was published, it's a little bit different. Most books are horizontal. Frank Miller published 300 vertical. And he published it vertical because he wanted to tell a story, and he wanted to tell a story in a different type of way with paneling. It's the story of the Spartan king Leonidas and his small force of Greek warriors who almost defeat the mighty Persian king Xerxes. It was told in 5 parts. So the first one, he published in, I believe, 1998. The graphic novel itself was published in 1999, but it was told in 5 parts, and it was told widescreen. And so he would have these, like, just widescreen. Imagine looking at a comic panel, and most of the time in comic panels, you have, 1, 2, 3, or you have action all over the page, thinking about this. But then you have, with his, it's just 2 panels per page, and they're widescreen, and so you could see the different the artwork, and he did so many different things of trying to show you the difference between the differences in the battles. You have the Spartans, who were the smaller force, who were underestimated by the large and mighty Persian Empire. So when he was drawing, what came out was you had close-ups and things of how tight and how the drawings for the Spartans were tight. It was clean. It was their armor. Like, you could see all this. And when he would draw the Persians, it would be chaos. It was almost like it was looking into a mess of things, because you have this mighty Persian army running into battle, and then you have this tight, uniformed, cleanly drawn Spartan army that they're facing. And he did that on purpose because he was trying to tell the story of how, again, the Persians underestimated this small army of 300. And it's not a direct, retelling of that story. It is stylized, and he took some liberties with it. He's been criticized for some of his liberties that he took with it, but Lynn Varney was his colorist, and they won a major comic industry awards from their peers and just the industry itself. And it's one of the great. I mean, if you get a chance to see the graphic novel, and I've seen it where it's this humongous, coffee table style book, and it's just gorgeous, drawn gorgeous. And the story itself, it's that underdog story. They did not they were not victorious, but it gives you that as you're reading it, you see all of the hard work and the effort that they put into them holding off the Persian army. Gave the rest of Greece time to prepare for the Persian army to come through. And Greece ended up defeating the Persian army. But if it was not for the Spartans, Greece would have fell to Persia at that time. He did get some backlash from 300 due to his portrayal of male homosexuality. Like, it was a negative portrayal of it. And the LGBTQ community called him out on it, but he did not back down from what he drew and what he wrote. He actually still will not back down from what he drew and what he wrote. And he will also not back down from his ethnic stereotypes that he drew also. So there were some sensitive subjects that he approached, and they are not in the light of in any standard. They were stereotypical, and they were not. They were negative, but again, Mr. Miller has never backed down from any of his controversial works. He's done quite a few, and he stands by all of his works. So, and that's where he still stands. But I do recommend it if just for the artwork alone. But he, like I said, he's won many awards, and he is 300. It's a great story. The movies did well. Even the movies themselves were stylized in a way that sort of mimicked the graphic novel too. So I think Mr. Miller was pleased, I think, with that portrayal also. Up next, Trinity.
All right. So, Trinity. This is the story of the atomic bomb in World War II by Jonathan Fetter Vaughn. This was an interesting read. I've thumbed through this one a couple of times once we had it in when somebody ordered it. This one, it begins pretty much with a conversation between a soldier and a scientist. And what it is, they're about to enter the sanctuary known as Los Alamos National Laboratory. And when the scientist asked the soldier if he ever heard of it was Prometheus, and basically the story of the Greeks gods, the story of Prometheus about him giving fire to mankind. And when the soldier says no, basically the scientist goes in to start retelling the myth. And after he finishes telling the myth, basically what ends up happening is the novel rewinds kind of back into 1898, when Madame Curie discovered radioactivity. And so in this book, there's a story to it, but it's almost written as if it's an informational, almost like a scientific guide, almost. So basically, what ends up happening second after you get the myth of Prometheus, you get a timeline, and that timeline goes from the late 1800s up until the 1930s. So it goes from Madame Curie discovering radioactivity to James Chadwick discovering neutrons and the discovery of nuclear fission. Basically, it starts getting into the political climate at that time, as far as the conversations between I think it's Wigner and Albert Einstein. They had a conversation about the Nazis creating basically a bomb using this technology. And so when the news of those discussions reach America, to the Manhattan Project. Now the story jumps then to after the bombing of Pearl Harbor. After the bombing of Pearl Harbor by the Japanese, that is when the United States made an all-out effort to actually build an atomic bomb. Now, they didn't know what it was going to be in the end. They just knew that they wanted to use the nuclear fission to produce this weapon. So basically, all the scientists and their families were sworn to secrecy and moved into the vicinity of those labs. And it was there that they basically developed the first two bombs, which were nicknamed Little Boy and Fat Man. So I believe this was during President Truman's tenure.
You're correct.
So what ends up happening is after after they have tested the bomb, they give the go ahead to drop the bomb on Hiroshima. Now, the book actually goes into detail into them dropping the bomb, and is put into a way that, I guess, not to offend, but it's truly a graphical representation of the historical record as we would see today in textbooks. Um, Now, where he starts, Feder Vorm actually weaves into this story, though, some of the firsthand accounts of people that were on the ground after the bomb dropped, and I mean, Japanese citizens. So there's a scene in there where I guess two little boys are walking home from school and the bomb is dropped, and one of them is immediately disintegrated, and the other one is thrown about, but he survives. So it goes from that point to actually showing how America was going to drop the second bomb, and it was going to be dropped on the city of Kokura, but the weather would not permit it. And they did not have enough fuel to return to the American homeland or to any of their bases. So that is why the second bomb ended up being dropped on Nagasaki. Uh, After the bomb is dropped on Nagasaki, of course, the Japanese then basically they didn't want to retreat before when that first bomb was dropped. But after the second bomb is dropped, they end up surrendering. The book Trinity actually it also goes into the fact that after the bombs were dropped, many weeks, months later, Japanese citizens were starting to come down with a mysterious disease that they called Disease X at the time. What we now know today as radiation poisoning. So, what basically this book introduces you to the what's the word for it? They introduce you to the introduction of radioactivity to the world powers, seeing that it can be used as a deterrent, and it also basically brings in the I guess you can say the doctrine of mutually assured destruction. So, and that's what this book Trinity hits on. It goes from the atomic bomb to the world basically realizing the results of nuclear warfare. And that's it on this one.
All right. Our next, this one here is a tale that I don't know if too many people know about the Harlem Hellfighters. A lot of us know about the Tuskegee Airmen, World War II, and their sacrifices that they made for their country. The Harlem Hellfighters were a regiment in World War One. That was an army regiment, the 369 Infantry. It was an all African American regiment that came home not losing one man. Spent the majority of the time that they were at war seeing frontline situations and never losing a foot of ground to the enemy. But it's also a story of triumph, but then it's a story of heartbreak, because It details the horrors of war. I guess you can see from the artwork there on the cover. It's written by Max Brooks. Max Brooks. Some of you may be familiar with Max Brooks. He's an author, but he's written things like World War Z, um, a lot of sci-fi. Um, sci-fi. Basically his genre is pretty much sci-fi, but this one he went into history. And as I was researching this particular title, he wrote this graphic novel because in the 90s he had been approached to write the story of the Harlem Hellfighters as a script. It was around the time that when you had your miniseries movies that used to come, Sunday night miniseries that used to come on your networks at the time. And so they had approached him to do the story of the Harlem Hellfighters, and he kept getting rejected in Hollywood because he was not the only person doing this, writing this script. And Hollywood at the time did not want to tell the story. They felt like it was being saturated because you had the Tuskegee Airmen, you had things like Saving Private Ryan, so did another war movie. But he also said, had it been a white regiment, the movie would have been done earlier, like in the 1940s, when early Hollywood. But because this was an all African American regiment, they kind of got buried in history. And the men that came home, these valiant, brave men that came home, they came back home to the horrors of racism, because after the end of World War I, it was the bloody summer of 1919, which a lot of African American soldiers came home to. They called it the bloody summer because all over the United States, in different cities, there was some sort of unrest in these cities where whites were attacking black soldiers returning home, especially returning home in their uniforms. A lot of soldiers were lynched during this period. A lot of cities, especially in the parts of the cities that had predominantly African American, were destroyed. Atlanta actually was one of those cities. The race riots of Atlanta happened also that summer. So they were not celebrated when they came back home. They were subjected to horrors again of racism. It tells their story beautifully. I can't wait to read it. We actually have this one in the branch. And it's not a happy ending for them, but you do get to see the story of them surviving war, but coming home was not that happy. But it's still a well-written story. Max Brooks. Maybe one day there will be a movie actually made about it, but this is from his point of view, from the script that he was going to write. So I definitely recommend it. Got one more here. The last one that I'm going to talk about is my friend Dahmer. And friend should be put in quotes for this one, because technically the author was not friends with Jeffrey Dahmer. But Durf Backdurf, that's his name, was he went to school with Jeffrey Dahmer. And if those of you who don't know who Jeffrey Dahmer is, he was a serial killer, and that killed quite a few people, and he also ate some of their body parts. He to the public, Dahmer's a monster, but this guy knew Dahmer when he was a teenager. He sat behind him in class, and he finds a way to make Jeffrey Dahmer sympathetic. How do you make a serial killer sympathetic? But it shows you a young man who is grappling with his sexuality. Jeffrey Dahmer was gay, but he grew up in a time and in a place where being a homosexual was not an option. He grew up in the Midwest. He grew up on a farm in a very religious, in a sense, religious household. He was raised by his parents, and also his grandparents were around. Also, he spent some time living with his grandmother. He was sent to live with his grandmother after some disturbing behavior that he did. But it shows you a young man who's struggling. He's struggling with thoughts of, again, eating people. His psyche at the time, he was shy. He was also drinking very heavily as a teenager. Jeffrey Dahmer was, and he was somebody just that never fit in. He always, even his classmates, there was always something off about him. So what it does is it shows you a story of, I think one of the reviews that I saw for it was saying how anybody who works with children, anybody who is a teacher or a counselor, it's a great story to read because it shows you how the system failed him. He was, like I said, he was sent to live with his grandparents because his parents found out that he was gay, and the way that they treated him afterwards, and then just some of the behavior that they ignored, because he was exhibiting some of this before he went full-blown serial killer. He was keeping dead things, in the basement. He was doing things like that, like this, just the awful smell coming from his grandmother's basement. He was exhibiting behavior that at this point in time, in this day and age, it would have been addressed by somebody. Back in the 60s and into the 70s, not so much. It was just, well, that's just how he is. And they were trying to sort of cure him of his homosexuality. And it was just there was a lot of wrong decisions made. But Backdorf tries to weave the story where you kind of see where Jeffrey Dahmer's life kind of went on just took the wrong turns. And this teenager who, again, was a shy kid, alcoholic due to his repressed sexuality, just trying to deal with all the, in a sense, pressures, but at the same time having some very dark and angry and later on sadistic thoughts, because he killed quite a few people and ate quite a few people. But it's a tragic tale in the end. That's pretty much what it is, because, he died. I think he was killed in prison in the early 90s. Never even got to see the electric chair. He was killed by a fellow inmate. So I think they made this also into a movie, My Friend Dahmer. I think it's on Netflix too. It's translated into a movie, but highly recommended. If you like true crime, and people like true crime, it's one of those that you can read, and it doesn't go into quite the detail that, like of him killing, later in life. We're really just seeing him as a teenager. So yeah, I definitely recommend it. But those are all the stories that we have for today. And if you want to put some of those items on hold, you totally can. Some of them are in Branch that you can come and check out. Roland, what's up next for us?
Next week, next we're going to be doing an expose on the Scarlet Witch.
So we're back
So,
to
March 23rd.
Yeah, we're back to our comics, and Marvel is next, so Scarlet Witch, yeah. But want to share with you guys also, before we go, some of the new arrivals that we have at the Branch that you can check out. Got Joe Hill, horror. If you're into horror, if you're into suspense, horror, thriller, Joe Hill here. If some of you don't know, Joe Hill is the son of legendary horror master Stephen King. But Joe is a whole lot darker and a whole lot more twisted than his daddy. So that's all I'm going to say about Joe. But Basket Full of Heads is available for checkout. It's also, we have Batman Three Jokers available for checkout, written by Jeff Johns. This is the sort of the conclusion to, I guess, the continuation. I'm not going to say conclusion because they may pick it up again, but that decades-long battle between the three Jokers. There's three Jokers that have always been around the Dark Knight. The Clown Prince of Crime himself, but it's a story of all the past victims of the Joker. So you have Batman himself, Batgirl, and Red Hood. And all three of those Jokers are going to show up. And it's a mystery. So I can't wait to read it. But it is available to check out. We also have Captain America by how do you pronounce his name? Tanashi Coates?
Ta-Nehisi Coates.
Ta-Nehisi Coates.
Yeah.
Who also wrote the Black Panther graphic novels that have come out recently. But this is The Legend of Steve Rogers, Captain America. Captain America is trying to prove his innocence and for a crime that he did not commit. And he is being pursued by none other than Nick Fury himself. So this is Cap on the run yet again. Seems like Cap is always on the run. But that is also available for checkout. So if you guys get a chance, come by and see us and pick those up. But don't forget to join us as we cover the Chaos of Magic Witch. I'm looking forward to this one, Roland, actually.
Oh,
yeah. So March 23rd, see you guys in 2 weeks.
All right, everybody.
All right.